Hello everyone, our project for this course is Iron Fortified Tea to fight against anemia. My name is Muhammad Ali.
My name is Andrew.
My name is Oliver.
My name is Lakshay Mehta.
My name is Haji.
And we'll take you through this presentation. Okay, so to start off with a bit of an introduction about the disease known as anemia. It's a condition that develops when an individual has a severely low red blood cell count, which means that you have low concentration of hemoglobin in your blood, which means that basically your body is transporting oxygen around to your organs in an inefficient way. This can lead to organ shutdown or organ failure, which is why it is quite dangerous to the South Asian population. In India, 87% of the female population is actually afflicted with anemia. This could be attributed somewhat to their Hindu diet. About 80% of India's population is actually Hindu, which means that they view the cow as a sacred symbol, which means that they don't consume any beef. This means that they have to rely on non-heme sources of iron for their diet, which means plant-based iron. Plant-based iron is not necessarily as easily absorbed by the body as meat-based iron, and at the same time, beef is one of the highest sources of iron. This instigated the search for a sustainable, viable, and non-culturally intrusive solution by Dr. Diosadi at the University of Toronto. So, to define anemia, this infographic here defines a threshold for different age groups and gender groups to make diagnosing someone with anemia a bit easier. So, you can see that children are classified into 3 age groups ranging from half a year to 15 years old. And the threshold numbers corresponding to those years are the amount of hemoglobin, grams per liter, that if someone falls below this threshold, it means that they would be diagnosed as anemic. You also have non-pregnant women, pregnant women, and men. And you can see that the thresholds for children ranging from 0.5 to 4.99 years, and pregnant women are the lowest threshold, which means these are the 2 groups that are at most risk of being diagnosed as anemic. So for the third slide, these 2 infographics are just an overlay of the global map, and they serve the purpose of showing visually the prevalence of anemia as a condition in the multiple regions of the world. So you can see that Africa is a region of high incidence, and so is South Asia. These figures are for women aged 15 to 49, and you can see that the areas of highest prevalence are those that I previously mentioned.
So I'll be talking about how we selected our country. So as you heard previously, we narrowed our focus down to South Asia due to the need with low iron. So after narrowing it down, we consider 3 main factors. Is there a need for iron fortification? And is tea heavily consumed there? And is there a high infrastructure that can support this project? So based on these factors within South Asia, we found the best candidate to be India. And I will discuss why India was chosen as the best candidate of all the countries in South Asia. There are 3 main reasons why we chose India. One of them being continued growth of the economy. The government of India is heavily focused on economic growth, specifically for rural areas. And this applies directly to our project, since most of our target market is in those areas. Furthermore, there already is a well-established culture of tea. So what this means is tea consumption is already high in India and is ingrained in the social culture there. And lastly, India does need more iron. As you've heard, the iron deficiency anemia is linked to major issues and it affects more than half of women and children. And the effects of this is that it's linked to death and other medical conditions. So to analyze this project, the method we chose is PESTLE, and this considers the political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental implications of this. And we chose this because it seemed like the most holistic view of the entire project, and that's crucial for implementing a technology in this part of the world. Furthermore, it makes it easier to analyze different parts of the market and how they're evolving and how they're changing. So we will continue with this project and discuss each of these aspects.
For political section, we found that the Indian government has increased the public awareness of anemia and introduced intervention programs throughout the years. From 1970, it introduced the National Nutrition Anemia Prophylaxis Program to ensure that the children between 6 months to 16 months to have the 20 mg elemental iron. In 2012, a 5-year plan has been introduced to reduce anemia in girls and women by 50%. While in recent years, the Indian government introduced the National Health Mission and the Integrated Child Development Scheme and spent $5.5 billion. However, it is still $700 million below the estimated requirement stated in the Global Nutrition Report. It also has some other existing strategies, such as National Iron Plus Initiative Plan. So we can conclude that the Indian government has kept trying to solve the problem of anemia, and thus will definitely support the technology. As you can see from the diagram, the inclusive business model we want to introduce is to collaborate with the top tea manufacturing companies to distribute the iron-fortified tea to the local community. We will analyze the business models in terms of both demand side and the supply side. For the demand side, we found that 70% of the tea produced in India is consumed within its border. Also, as a fourth largest exporter of tea, India has a huge market size of tea industrial. As you may notice from the chart, there is around 200 billion Indian rupees increased in 4 years. So we can conclude that as a consumers, India has huge consuming ability to support the business model. For the supply side, we want to collaborate with leading distributors and Indian companies, such as Tata Coffee and Brook Bond Tata. We will offer these companies business propositions in the form of increased profits. The expected cost of iron fortification is 10 to 20 cents per person per year. Price increase will not be that much, but increased sales will lead to increased profits. Another benefit is the possible expand in the Indian tea industrial, and so the job opportunities will also increase. For the economical perspective, iron deficiency anemia has cost India significantly in the economical perspective. As stated in the 2003 paper published in the Food Policy, due to iron deficiency anemia, India lost 0.9% of its GDP. This means that India lost up to 20.25 billion according to the World Bank estimate of India's GDP. Let's see how the technology can impact the economy in India currently. 1 million workers employed in the tea industry. The industry will also create income opportunities for almost another 10 million people. If the iron fortification tea technology can be managed to be spread across India, and the iron-fortified tea become a daily source of absorbing iron for the Indian populations, the government will invest more in the tea industry and thus create more job opportunities. The economy of India will be boosted due to the iron-fortified tea.
I'll be discussing the social aspect in the pestle analysis. When discussing the social aspect of tea in India, we have to go back in time a little bit, to British colonial rule in the 1800s. During this time, many Indians were employed in the tea growing business and manufacturing, and this was for the benefits of the British people. But one important aspect of the British culture was tea time, which is basically an afternoon tea that had to happen every day as a part of their culture. And during colonial rule, this concept became adapted by the wealthier Indians, and as tea became cheaper, tea time started to spread out throughout the country. Furthermore, this was helped by tea being advertised in movies, commercials, cartoons, and most of these claimed health benefits. And health benefits, a lot of these weren't proven, but these commercials were claimed to have these, and all these factors helped tea expand in India. Now, another issue with social is how easy is the access to tea. So whether it's a business meeting or a social gathering, it is expected that tea will be there, and tea will be served. And this has resulted in very easy access, specifically from people known as chaiwalas, who give out chai, which is basically a mix of tea, milk, and sugar. And the chaiwalas, which are the salesmen you see in the picture over there, they're found in every street corner, every town and city. And another important thing to consider with the social aspect is that this technology is not expected to change the taste of the tea, and since there's no change, there shouldn't be any social backlash. Also, currently 4% of our target market already consumes other kinds of fortified food, so there isn't really any stigma against fortification of food in India.
So for the technology section of the pestle analysis, we looked at the mechanisms of iron absorption in an individual's body. And through research, we discovered that frequent tea consumption might be inhibiting an individual's ability to actually sufficiently absorb iron from food. This is because tea contains a chemical known as tannin, which reacts with iron and actually limits the amount of iron that gets absorbed by the individual's body. This is why doctors recommend waiting about an hour or two before consuming tea after your meal, but this is quite difficult for a region such as India, where it's culturally ingrained to consume tea as a post-meal formality. Dr. Diosadi at the University of Toronto proposed micro-encapsulating iron and fortifying tea with it. This would allow the iron to be successfully transported to the individual's digestive system so as to react with the stomach acid and actually be sufficiently absorbed without reacting with the tannin. So just to take you through the process of fortifying tea and how we get to the end result of microencapsulated iron particles. The first step is to take durum semolina, which is a type of wheat, and infuse it with a very grainy iron, and then put it through an extrusion process and cut it in order to create tiny pellets. Following that, you have to sieve it in order to get it to a microscopic level or microscopic size. Dry it in order to remove any moisture that might interfere with the reactions. Make sure to color mask it so as to eliminate the possibility of someone looking at a tea bag and thinking that's contaminated or is not safe for consumption, and therefore just completely getting rid of the iron fortified tea instead of ingesting it, which would make the intervention completely useless. Following the color masking process, you need to micro-encapsulate the iron particulates and then again dry them. And then after drying, the final step is to infuse the micro-encapsulated iron and add it with the dried tea leaves and tea bags, which makes it ready for distribution and consumption. It's important to point out that the micro-encapsulation stage is the most important part of this process, since it prevents the iron from reacting with tannin in the tea. In conclusion, this technology allows the iron to be ingested by the user via dissolving in their stomach acid instead of reacting with the tannin and inhibiting the absorption.
From a legal standpoint, it is important to consider the toxicity of iron, as it is an important factor to consider when providing fortified tea. The toxicity of elemental iron consists of 3 levels. The first level is under 20 milligrams of iron per kilogram of person, and this is considered non-toxic. Anywhere between 20 to 60 milligrams per kilogram of person is considered moderately toxic, and anything greater than 60 milligrams per kilogram of person is considered fatal. Iron comprises of 0.1 to 0.3 of the tea by weight, and each cup of tea comprises of approximately 0.2 grams of loose tea, which is around 6 milligrams of iron per cup. So a 70 kilogram person will require almost 700 cups of tea in order to reach toxic levels of iron, which means this is virtually impossible for someone to overdose on fortified tea, which is great from a legal standpoint. Another legal factor to consider is food imports. Because food imports are governed by the Food Safety and Standards Association of India, it is a complex process to import any kind of food, as shown by the flowchart. Since iron is not on the list of prohibited substances or high-risk foods such as baby powder, obtaining an import license will not be too difficult. However, what's more difficult is the tea tariffs, which is right now at 110%. This would make importing tea very expensive and would make it difficult to reach people in India at a reasonable price. The solution will be to work with local tea manufacturers to make and supply the tea for distribution.
I will now be discussing the environmental impacts of our project. So first, before I dive into the analysis itself, it's important to note that a lot of this environmental consequence that I'll be talking about is on the cultivation and processing stages of tea production itself and not so much on the fortification. And the reason for this is because once we scale this project up and it's extremely scalable, small environmental consequences that are existing right now will have huge impacts as we scale. And tea fortification also requires an integration with the tea production process itself, And because a lot of the tea production processes haven't been changed that much recently, this is a great opportunity to make sure some of those practices are improved on, as some of them really do need a lot of improvement, as I will be discussing in a bit. There are 4 areas of environmental concerns I'll be discussing. First is the deforestation and habitat fragmentation. Second is the negative consequences of pesticide usage. Third is how we're using unclean energy for all these processes. And lastly, the improper wastewater management and treatment in India. So first, making tea requires land. And when we convert natural land to agricultural land, that requires, 1, we have to cut down trees. And by cutting down trees, we're essentially taking what used to be a habitat and just splitting it apart, which divides all the resources and making life for animals a bit more difficult. An even more worrying concern is that the global trend of tea production is that it's rising because more people want more tea. And as tea production rises, we need more land for tea. So land use also rises, and because we need to cut down trees, we're just fragmenting more area and getting rid of the trees that we planted, and will take a long time to replant. So the next area of environmental concern is how we negatively use pesticides, because not only does it impact the environment, but it also impacts the consumers. A very worrying statistic found in Indian tea is that 67 of the pesticides found are actually not supposed to be used, meaning that majority of the pesticides found in this tea can be hazardous to not only the environment but also humans. There's good news to this, however, because there's a lot of research done in non-pesticidal management, which basically means we're trying to get rid of these pesticides and analyze farming as a system. By realizing how the ecosystem and human activity interacts, we can find a lot more common practices or sourcing natural resources in order to make pesticide usage not as necessary. The third area of environmental concern is that when we dry tea in the processing stage, it actually uses a lot of energy. And in India specifically, all of these energy sources are unclean and unrenewable. So right now they're using firewood, gas, and coal, and all those sources are burned until the tea reaches a certain moisture level. In order to mitigate this risk, we need to do a systemic change and shift the energy landscape of India towards renewables, which is a big task, but as I mentioned before, by implementing this project and scaling it up, this is one of the opportunities which we realize that improvements can be made, and the energy sector will not only affect the tea industry, but lots of other manufacturing processes as well. The last area of environmental concern is that India doesn't have the best wastewater management systems. Contaminated water coming from tea processing is not treated and it's just dumped right into the ecosystem. If we're talking about iron fortification, the natural question that comes out is, well, what happens if we increase iron concentrations in water? And research shows that it's not directly correlated to the health of ecosystems, but it's still something that we don't want in the water. Again, like the energy issue, to take care of this, we'll need to implement wastewater management systems all across the manufacturing industry in India. Again, it's a huge systemic change. It's something that's extremely necessary if we are to improve the environmental consequences of not only this project, but the tea farming practices and processing that has been happening for many years before this project has been implemented. So there's the end of our pestle analysis, but before we conclude, I just want to take you through how we plan to measure our impact and how we plan to implement this project. So we will be conducting random control trials in which we select a random community to be the treatment community, which will receive the iron fortified tea, and a control community, which will not receive the iron fortified tea. So we select a control community and a treatment community, both labeled as number 1 in the slide. And these are chosen randomly to eliminate any bias that could be in this experiment. So if treatment community number 1 sees increase in health indicators and increased iron levels in their bodies, then we will iterate and choose another random community, which will be treatment community number 2. And this will iterate until we hit a problem, such as treatment community number 3, in which we will go in and analyze what actually happened, what is different from this community that isn't present in other communities, and what are our sources of failure. Once we find that out, we will make sure that it's not a risk that we're not seeing all across the communities and that it's specific, and we'll adjust our implementation plan to make sure it fits that local community. And this will keep iterating. We'll get new control communities also chosen randomly until all the communities in India essentially receive iron fortified tea. The challenges with this is how can we manage and control the distribution? The best way is to partner with distribution centers and tea manufacturers. That way, once they're on board, that way we can distribute tea to wherever is necessary for this trial.
Following the pest analysis, this infographic here shows a quick synopsis of the main takeaways of each of the 6 sections. And the main takeaway from this slide is that in order for this technology to be impactful, the microencapsulation technology is extremely pertinent to the success of iron fortified tea because it prevents it from reacting with tannin, which means that if people drink tea right after food, which is a cultural norm in South Asian countries, it wouldn't necessarily interfere with any iron absorption. And other than that, the technology needs to be mindful of social constructs so as to not interfere with the way people perceive fortified foods. And furthermore, there needs to be certain steps taken in order to make sure that sourcing the tea is maintained at an environmentally friendly level by implementing such technologies as renewable energy. Thank you for listening, and we'll open up the floor to any questions you might have about the technology.